I found them in my shower on a Wednesday afternoon, and everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be a lie. My name is Ray Kowalski. I'm 53 years old, and I've been an HVAC technician for going on 26 years. I run a small crew out of a shop I built up from nothing. 4 guys, a decent reputation in the county, and enough steady work to keep the lights on and then some. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable. I own my house outright, or I did, before the lawyers got involved. My grandmother left it to me when she passed, and I'd been living in it for nearly 23 years by the time all this happened. That house meant something to me beyond just property. It was the place where I learned to fix things, where I learned what it meant to take care of something and have it last. I'd been married to my wife Connie for 18 years. We met when we were both young and stupid, had our son Garrett before we ever made it official, and then did the right thing and got married when he was about 6 months old. Garrett was 19 at the time of all this. Second year of college, studying business, calling me every Sunday to talk about his week. Or so I thought. Connie was 42, still sharp looking, still funny when she wanted to be. I thought we were fine. I thought we were one of those couples that had made it through the hard years and come out the other side with something solid. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. It was a Wednesday in October when I came home early from a job in Columbus. I'd been up there for 3 days doing a commercial install on a new office building, and the general contractor had moved the schedule around, which meant my part wrapped up 2 days ahead of plan. Instead of staying in a hotel and eating bad takeout by myself until Friday, I decided to drive home. I even stopped at a flower shop on Route 40 and picked up a bunch of white lilies because Connie liked them and I figured it would be a nice surprise. I pulled into the driveway around 2 in the afternoon. There was a car parked at the curb I didn't recognize. A silver Audi, newer model, clean. I figured maybe it belonged to one of Connie's friends from the gym or a neighbor stopping by. I didn't think anything of it. I let myself in through the front door, set the flowers on the kitchen counter, and called out, "Hey, I'm home early." Nothing. I could hear the shower running upstairs. I figured she was in there and hadn't heard me, so I filled a vase with water for the lilies and started up the stairs. That's when I heard the voices, 2 of them, hers and a man's I didn't recognize. I stopped on the third stair and just stood there for probably 30 seconds, not moving, not breathing, telling myself I was hearing things, that maybe the TV was on in the bathroom, that maybe she was on the phone with someone. I told myself every stupid thing a man tells himself when he's standing at the edge of something he doesn't want to look at. But the voices got clearer as I moved down the hall. Our bedroom door was open. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and through the frosted glass panel of the shower, I could see 2 shapes. I don't remember deciding to open the door. I don't remember crossing the bedroom. The next thing I was fully conscious of was my hand yanking the shower door open. And there was my wife and some guy I had never seen before in my life. Dark hair, maybe mid-30s, built like he spent a lot of time at the gym. And they were both completely naked, and they both looked at me like I was the one who had walked in somewhere I didn't belong. The guy, I'd find out later his name was Brian Stahl, immediately raised both hands like I was pointing a gun at him and said, Okay, let me explain." Connie screamed and grabbed for a towel off the rack. I told him very clearly, "Get out of my house." He said, "Absolutely, man, just let me get dressed and I'm gone, no problem." And the thing that broke me wasn't the situation itself. It wasn't even Connie. It was the tone of his voice. He was calm, almost bored. Like this was an inconvenience he'd dealt with before. Like I was just some obstacle between him and the door, and if he was polite enough about it, I'd step aside and let him walk out. He was in my grandmother's house, in my shower, with my wife, and he was treating it like a minor scheduling conflict. I grabbed him by both shoulders and threw him against the tile wall. He bounced off it and tried to shove me back, and that's when I hit him, once, hard, across the jaw, and then again before he could get his hands up. He went down onto the bathroom floor and stayed there, one hand covering his face, blood coming from his nose, not moving. Connie was screaming at me to stop. I stepped back. I looked at the blood on the tile, and something in my head clicked back on. like a circuit breaker resetting. I told him he had 5 minutes to get dressed and get out before I called the police. He grabbed his clothes from the floor of the bedroom and walked out of the house, still pulling his shirt over his head, blood dripping down his chin. Connie ran after him. She didn't even look back. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a while. Then I went downstairs and put the lilies in the vase and sat at the kitchen table and didn't do anything for a long time. Connie called me that night from her sister Patrice's house. The conversation lasted about 4 minutes. "I'm staying here for a while," she said. "Okay." "You could have killed him, Ray." "I didn't." "You're scaring me. I've never seen you like that. You've never given me a reason to be like that. I want you to know that I'm considering filing for divorce and a restraining order because I genuinely don't feel safe right now." I laughed at that, and I know it wasn't the right response, but I couldn't help it. "You don't feel safe. You were in my house, in my shower, with another man, and you don't feel safe." "I'm not going to argue with you," she said, and hung up. The next morning, Garrett called. He was at school, 3 hours away, and his voice had that tight, controlled quality that meant he'd been coached on what to say. "Mom told me what happened," he said. "Okay. Did she tell you why it happened?" "She told me you attacked someone. She was cheating on me, Garrett, in our house. I came home and found them together." There was a pause. "That doesn't give you the right to assault someone." "He was in my house. He's a person, Dad. You could have just asked him to leave." "I did ask him to leave. Before you hit him." I didn't say anything for a second. "Did your mother tell you how long this has been going on?" "That's not the point. I think it's pretty much the whole point. The point is that you physically attacked someone, and now Mom is scared of you, and I don't know what to think." "Then take some time and think about it," I said. "When you're ready to have an honest conversation, call me back." He didn't call back. Not for a long time. That Friday, 2 officers showed up at my shop at 10 in the morning while I was in the middle of going over a bid with a commercial client. They were professional about it. Quiet, no drama. But there's nothing discreet about two uniformed cops walking into your place of business. My office manager, Deb, had to take over the meeting. My client, a property manager I'd been working with for 6 years, looked at me with this expression I still think about sometimes. Not angry, just confused, like he was trying to reconcile the person he knew with what he was watching happen. Brian had pressed charges, third-degree assault, a misdemeanor, but one that carried up to a year in jail and a $4,000 fine if I was convicted. Bail was $2,500. I spent Friday night in the county lockup, which is about as pleasant as it sounds, and my lawyer got me out Saturday morning. While I was sitting in a cell, Connie went to the courthouse and got a temporary restraining order. She told the judge I had a history of controlling and violent behavior and that she feared for her safety. 18 years. Not once had I raised my hand to her. Not once had I even raised my voice in a way that would make a reasonable person uncomfortable. And she stood in front of a judge and described a monster. The order meant I couldn't come within 100 yards of her, which included my own house, since she'd moved back in while I was locked up. She'd also had the locks changed. I drove home Saturday morning and my key didn't work. There was a patrol car parked across the street. I called my lawyer from the driveway. "The house is yours," he said. "You have the deed. You have the inheritance documentation. We can fight this, but it takes time. The temporary order runs 2 weeks, and then there's a hearing. So I can't go inside my own house for 2 weeks." "Correct. My clothes are in there, my mail, everything." "I know. I'm sorry, Ray." I was living out of the suitcase I'd taken to Columbus. I checked into a Marriott Courtyard off the interstate and hung my work shirts in the hotel closet and tried to figure out how my life had ended up here in the span of 72 hours. My brother Dennis called that evening. He'd heard from our cousin who'd heard from someone at the hardware store, which is how information travels in a small county. Dennis is 2 years older than me and about 10 times more level-headed. "You doing okay?" he said. "Not really." "You need anything?" "I need to get back into my house." "I know, your lawyer's good. You'll get it back." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think you should have called the cops instead of hitting him." "I know. But I also think any man in that situation would have done exactly what you did." "Apparently the law doesn't agree." "The law's not always right," Dennis said, "but it's what we've got." I was also dealing with the financial side of it, which was its own kind of nightmare. Between the lawyer, the bail, and the hotel, I'd already burned through $8,000 in 4 days. I was still paying the mortgage on a house I couldn't enter. I was covering my credit cards, my truck payment, and half of Garrett's tuition and living expenses at school. And Connie still had access to our joint checking account. My lawyer advised me to open a separate account and have my payroll deposited there immediately, which I did. But the damage was already done. She'd moved a significant amount out of the joint account in the days after I was arrested. Not enough to clean it out, but enough to hurt. I sat in that hotel room on a Sunday night eating a sandwich from the gas station down the road, and I thought about the fact that I had done nothing wrong. I had been faithful for 18 years. I had worked hard. I had paid for everything. I had come home with flowers, and somehow I was the one eating a gas station sandwich in a hotel, while my wife slept in my grandmother's house. It's a strange feeling, being punished for being the victim. I don't recommend it. The hearing on the restraining order was 3 weeks later. I want to tell you about that day in some detail, because it changed things in ways I'm still processing. My lawyer, a guy named Phil Garrett, no relation to my son, just an unfortunate coincidence in names, had done his homework. He'd subpoenaed Connie's credit card records and bank statements going back a year. What came back was not pretty. Over the previous 8 months, Connie had spent just over $7,000 on hotels. Not local motels, we're talking the Westin downtown, a boutique place in the River North neighborhood of Chicago, a resort outside Milwaukee, a long weekend at a hotel in Minneapolis that ran $400 a night. She'd spent another $4,000 on restaurants, always for two people based on the check amounts. And she'd put about $3,000 into jewelry stores and men's clothing shops. $14,000. On Brian Stahl. Her phone records showed hundreds of calls and texts to his number over those 8 months. The timing lined up perfectly with the credit card charges. It wasn't a fling. It wasn't a mistake. It was a sustained, deliberate, expensive relationship that she had been conducting for the better part of a year, while I was at work and on job sites and in hotel rooms in Columbus, thinking everything was fine. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Dunmore, listened to Connie's lawyer make the case for the permanent order. He talked about my pattern of volatile behavior and my controlling tendencies and my demonstrated capacity for violence. It was polished, and it was completely made up. Then Phil presented the financial evidence, and the tone in the room shifted. But before that happened, my son testified. Garrett had driven down from school. He was wearing a button-down shirt I'd never seen before, probably bought for the occasion, and he sat in the witness chair and looked at the judge and not at me. And he said things I am still not sure I've fully absorbed. He said I was controlling. He said I'd monitored his phone and internet use throughout his teenage years. He said I made all the financial decisions without consulting Connie. He said he'd grown up walking on eggshells, afraid of my temper, and that going away to college had felt like a relief because he no longer had to manage my moods. I sat at the defense table and listened to my son describe a man I didn't recognize, a man who had apparently terrorized his family for 2 decades, a man who had left his wife and child living in fear. I had coached his little league team. I had driven him to every single one of his high school cross-country meets, including the ones that were 2 hours away. I had sat with him at the kitchen table every Sunday night when he was in middle school and helped him with his math homework. I had taught him to change his own oil when he was 16 and been genuinely proud when he did it right the first time. I had called him every week when he went off to college because I missed him, and he was sitting 10 feet away from me, telling a judge he was afraid of me. Phil cross-examined him. He was methodical about it, which I appreciated because I was not in a state to appreciate much else. Can you describe a specific incident where your father was physically violent toward you or your mother? Garrett shifted in his seat. It's not always about physical violence. I understand, but can you name a specific incident? He had a way of making you feel like you couldn't say the wrong thing. That's not what I asked. A specific incident, a date, a location, something that happened. Garrett couldn't give one. He tried to redirect to emotional atmosphere and power dynamics, and Phil let him talk for a minute, and then came back to the same question. No specific incidents, no dates, no witnesses, no evidence. When Phil asked him directly whether his father had ever struck him or his mother, Garrett said no, but added that abuse takes many forms. The judge noted that. Then Phil presented the financial records, and Connie's lawyer did his best to argue they were irrelevant to the question of whether I posed a threat. Judge Dunmore didn't buy it. She said the evidence of a sustained, deliberate affair provided direct context for the incident that had brought us to court, and that context mattered when evaluating claims about the character and behavior of the respondent. The restraining order was dismissed. I got my house back. I walked out of that courthouse into a gray November afternoon, and my brother Dennis was waiting for me by the car. He shook my hand and said, "Let's go get lunch." And that was the right thing to say, because it was normal and simple, and I needed something normal and simple. But I couldn't leave without talking to Garrett. He was standing near the entrance with Connie and her sister Patrice, the three of them in a little cluster. When he saw me walking toward him, he didn't move away, which I took as a sign that some part of him was willing to have this conversation. "Why?" I said. I kept my voice down. I wasn't going to make a scene. "I told the truth," he said. "You told the truth about phone rules we had when you were 15. You described that as abuse." "It wasn't just the phone rules, Dad." "Then tell me what else." "Because I've been sitting there for 2 hours trying to figure out what I did that was so terrible, and I can't come up with it." He looked at the ground. "You always made us feel like everything was on your terms. I worked 60 hours a week, so you could go to a good school, and so your mother didn't have to work if she didn't want to. Is that what you mean by my terms?" "That's not—" He stopped. "You made it clear that you were the one holding everything together, that we owed you." "I never said that." "You didn't have to say it." I looked at him for a long moment. He was 19 years old, and he'd just lied in a courtroom to help his mother keep my house. And he was standing there, genuinely believing that he was the reasonable one in this conversation. "Okay," I said. "Okay, Garrett." I walked back to Dennis's car. Connie filed for divorce the same afternoon the restraining order was dismissed. Her lawyer came in hard, asking for alimony, half the house value, half of all shared assets. The argument was that she'd sacrificed her career for our family and deserved to be compensated for that sacrifice. The fact that she'd chosen to leave her part-time job 3 years earlier, because she was, in her words, tired of office politics, seemed to have been edited out of that version of events. The divorce proceedings took about 4 months. I won't walk you through every motion and counter-motion because it gets tedious, but the highlights are worth knowing. The house stayed mine. Inherited property is separate property under state law, and Phil had the documentation to prove it had been in my family before the marriage. Connie's lawyer tried to argue she was entitled to compensation for improvements made during the marriage, and Phil showed that every major renovation, the kitchen remodel, the basement finishing, the new roof, had been paid for out of my earnings, not joint funds. The judge awarded her $12,000 for her contribution to the property. That was it. The rest of the assets were divided based on contribution and conduct. Connie kept her car, her personal belongings, and $25,000 from our savings. I kept my retirement accounts, my truck, my tools, and everything else. No spousal support. The judge cited the adultery and the fact that Connie had a college degree and a work history and was fully capable of supporting herself. When Connie's lawyer made the argument that she needed more money because she was starting over after years of financial dependence, the judge looked at the credit card records and said something I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, "Someone who spent $14,000 on hotels, restaurants, and gifts for a paramour over the course of 8 months clearly has the capacity to manage a budget. The court is not persuaded that financial dependence is the issue here." Connie lost it. She started crying and telling the judge she'd given up her career for her family, which wasn't true, and that the ruling wasn't fair, which the judge ignored. The judge told her that adultery has consequences, that using marital funds to finance an affair constitutes a serious breach of fiduciary duty, and that she was free to appeal, but that the evidence was clear and the ruling was consistent with state guidelines for at-fault divorces. Garrett was in the courtroom for the final hearing. He'd driven down again, still in Connie's corner, still wearing that button down. When the judge read the ruling, he stood up and said loudly, "This is wrong. She has nowhere to go." The bailiff told him to sit down. After the hearing, he followed me out to the parking lot. "You're destroying her life," he said. "She made her choices, Garrett. I made mine. The judge made a ruling based on the facts. She has nothing. She has $25,000 and a college degree. That's more than a lot of people start over with. She's your wife. She was my wife. She stopped being my wife when she started spending our money on hotel rooms for another man. A real man takes care of his family." I turned and looked at him. He was 20 years old, and he was standing in a courthouse parking lot, lecturing me about what a real man does, and something in me just got very quiet. "A real son," I said, "doesn't lie under oath to help his mother take his father's house. You want to talk about what real men do? That's where I'd start." He flinched. "Good. I'm done paying your tuition," I said, "and your living expenses? That stops today." He stared at me. "What? You chose your side. That's your right. But choices have consequences, and this is one of them. I can't afford school without your help. Then you'll need to figure something out. Get loans, get a job. Do what people do. You can't do this." I just did. Connie had come out of the building in time to hear the last part of it. She came toward us with that particular walk she had when she was about to say something she'd already rehearsed. "You can't punish him for telling the truth," she said. "He didn't tell the truth. He told a story that you wrote for him, and it almost cost me my house and my freedom. He's an adult. Adults face consequences. He's your son. He testified against me in court. He called me an abuser. He looked me in the eye and described a childhood that never happened." I paused. "I love him. I will always love him. But I'm not going to pretend that what he did was okay, because he's my kid." Connie had tears running down her face. Garrett looked like he'd been hit. I got in my truck and drove home. The months after the divorce were quiet in a way I hadn't expected. I'd been braced for more drama, more legal maneuvering, more phone calls from people taking sides, but mostly what I got was silence. Connie was living with Patrice and her husband, trying to find an apartment she could afford on her own. Garrett went back to school, though I didn't know how he was managing it financially, and I told myself I wasn't going to ask. Dennis checked in regularly. He thought I was being too hard on Garrett, that the kid had been manipulated by his mother and deserved some grace. "He's 19, Dennis said one evening. We were at his place drinking beer on his back porch, the way we'd been doing since we were teenagers. He believed what his mother told him. That's what kids do. He's not a kid. He's 19 and in college. He's old enough to think for himself. He's old enough to know better, sure. But he's also old enough to be scared and confused and to want his mother to be okay. I understand that. I do. But there's a difference between supporting your mother and getting on a witness stand and lying about your father." Dennis was quiet for a moment. "What would it take for you to let him back in?" "A real apology. Not I was just sharing my perspective. Not I was protecting my mom. An actual acknowledgement that he made things up. And if he can't do that, then we're done for now." Dennis didn't push it. He knew me well enough to know when I'd made up my mind. I kept working. Took on some bigger commercial contracts, added a fifth guy to the crew. The shop was doing well. Better than it had in years, actually, because I wasn't distracted. I was just working and coming home to a quiet house and figuring out what the next chapter of my life looked like. It was Dennis's wife, Carol, who first mentioned singletune.com to me. She brought it up over dinner at their place on a Friday night, maybe 3 months after the divorce was finalized. She'd been talking to a friend of hers who'd gone through a rough divorce a few years back, and the friend had found it. She said it's not like regular dating apps, Carol explained, passing the bread. You don't even see profiles right away. First, you do this whole values assessment. They ask you about what you believe in, what you've been through, what you actually want from your life. Like real questions, not just, what's your favorite movie? And then the matches are based on that. Based on compatibility of who you actually are, not what you look like. Sounds like a lot of work, I said. That's the point, she said. The people who are willing to put in that kind of work at the front end, those are the people worth meeting. Dennis raised his beer at me. Not saying you need it, just saying it exists. I just got divorced 4 months ago. 3.5, Carol said, because she's precise about things like that. And you're not getting any younger, Raymond. Thank you, Carol. That's very helpful. She laughed. I'm just saying, it's for people who've been through real things. Divorce, loss, betrayal. People who want something that actually means something. I didn't say anything else about it that night, but I remembered it. I went on living my life, went to work, had dinner with Dennis and Carol on Fridays, watched baseball, fixed things around the house that had needed fixing for years and that I'd never gotten around to. There's a satisfaction in that, and taking care of something and making a thing work the way it's supposed to. I'd missed that feeling for longer than I'd realized. About 6 months after the divorce, Garrett called. I almost didn't answer. I stared at his name on the screen for 3 rings, and then picked up because he was still my son and I wasn't made of stone. Hey, he said. "No, hey." Silence for a moment. I wanted to ask if you'd reconsider the tuition, he said. Okay. I got loans, but they don't cover everything. I'm working at a restaurant on weekends, but it's not enough. I might have to drop out. I'm sorry to hear that. So you won't reconsider. I didn't say that. I said, I'm sorry to hear it. Another silence. Is there something you want to say to me, Garrett? I said what I said in court because I thought I was helping Mom, because she was scared and she needed someone to stand up for her. I understand that. I'm not apologizing for trying to help her. I'm not asking you to apologize for caring about your mother. I'm asking you to acknowledge that the specific things you said about me weren't true. I experienced them as true. You experienced phone rules as abuse. You experienced me working hard and making financial decisions as control. You experienced a normal, imperfect family as something traumatic. And then you went into a courtroom and described it that way, under oath, when the stakes were my house and my freedom. I paused. That's not perspective. That's a choice. He didn't say anything. When you're ready to say that, not that you're sorry for loving your mom, but that what you said about me wasn't fair and wasn't true, call me. I'll answer. I hung up. That was a hard evening. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I sat in the kitchen of my grandmother's house and thought about all the Sundays he'd called me from school to tell me about his week. And I wondered if any of that had been real or if I'd been wrong about everything. I don't think I was. But the wondering is its own kind of pain. I was sitting there, not doing much of anything, when I thought about what Carol had said about that app, about it being for people who'd been through real things, about the questions they asked being about what you actually believed in and what you'd actually been through. I pulled my phone out and looked it up. Singletune.com. I read through the description for a while. They talked about how the assessment worked, not personality tests in the quiz magazine sense, but actual questions about your values and your experience and what you were looking for in your life going forward. They were upfront that it was designed for people who'd already lived some of their life, who'd been through things, who weren't looking for something shallow. I didn't sign up that night, but I bookmarked it, which for me is a significant step. The reason I bring this up is because of what happened about a month later, which is when things got interesting again in a way I hadn't expected. My foreman, a guy named Walt Decker, had been with me for 11 years. He was 58, divorced twice, and had the particular wisdom that comes from making expensive mistakes with some regularity. We were eating lunch in the truck one afternoon, parked outside a job site, and he mentioned offhand that he'd been on a few dates recently. Good for you, I said. Met someone through this app, he said. Different kind of thing. They make you do this whole questionnaire before you can even see who's out there. Like an hour of questions about your life and what you believe and what you've been through. I looked at him. Singletune? He pointed at me. That's the one. Carol mentioned it to you? A few months back. It's not like the other stuff, he said. I tried the other stuff after my second divorce, and it was just, I don't know, felt like shopping. Like everybody's just a photo and a job title, and you're supposed to figure out from that whether you want to spend your life with someone. He shook his head. This was different. The woman I've been seeing, We matched because we'd both been through betrayal. We both had complicated relationships with our kids. Because of it, we both had the same ideas about what honesty meant in a relationship. That stuff came out in the assessment before we ever talked. And she's good, I said. She's really good, Walt said, and he said it in this quiet, genuine way that made me believe him. She's been through a lot. She doesn't pretend she hasn't. And she's not looking for someone to fix anything or save anything. She just wants something real. I thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. That night I went home and I completed the assessment on singletune.com. It took about 45 minutes. The questions were not what I expected. They weren't asking me about hobbies or what kind of music I liked. They were asking things like, what does trust mean to you and how has your understanding of it changed? What's something you believed about yourself that turned out to be wrong? What does a good day look like? Not in terms of events, but in terms of how you feel. I answered them honestly. I figured if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I'm not going to tell you how that chapter ends, because this isn't that story. But I will tell you that I'm in a better place than I was, and that the quiet in my house feels different than it did right after the divorce. Less like absence, more like space. About 18 months after the divorce was finalized, my brother called me on a Tuesday morning while I was driving to a job. Have you talked to Garrett lately? He said. Not since about 6 months ago. Why? I heard something from Cousin Dale. Apparently Garrett got married. I was quiet for a second. When? Last September. Small ceremony. His college girlfriend, Emma Pruitt, accounting major, good family from what Dale said. I didn't know he was that serious about her. Apparently it moved fast. Sarah, Connie, paid for most of it. Borrowed money to do it from what I hear. Of course she did. Anyway, I thought you should know. I thanked him and we hung up. I sat with that for a while. My son had gotten married and I hadn't been there. I hadn't even known it was happening. I thought about what that meant and decided it meant that the distance between us was real and probably permanent unless something changed, and that I couldn't make something change by wanting it to. 3 weeks later, Dennis called again. You're going to want to hear this, he said. Good news or bad news? Depends on how you look at it. What he'd heard through the same cousin and neighbor network that carries all information in a small county was that Emma had discovered Garrett was cheating on her. He'd been seeing a woman named Diane Colfax, mid-30s, married, 2 kids, who he'd met through Connie. Connie had gotten a job at a real estate office, and Diane was apparently a colleague or client or something in that orbit. Garrett had been coming around to see his mother, met Diane there, and it had gone from there. Diane's husband had found text messages on her phone. He'd confronted her, she'd admitted everything, and then, and this is the part that has a certain poetry to it, he'd contacted Emma directly through Facebook and told her exactly what was happening. Emma had kicked Garrett out the same day, filed for divorce within a week, moved back to her parents' house, and, according to Dennis, she'd emptied their joint account before she left and thrown her wedding ring at him in the parking lot of their apartment complex. I sat with that for a long time. I'm not going to tell you I felt good about it, because that's not quite right. I felt something more complicated than that. I felt the particular sadness of watching someone you love make the same mistakes you spent years trying to protect them from. I felt the strange, unwanted satisfaction of being proven right about something you never wanted to be right about. Mostly, I just felt tired. 2 weeks later, Garrett called. He was crying. Not the controlled, careful way he'd spoken to me before. Actually crying, voice breaking. The way he hadn't cried since he was maybe 12 years old. I need help, he said. What happened? Emma left. She took everything. I can't make rent. My car payment is due. I don't know what to do. I heard, I said. Silence. I'm sorry, he said. And for a moment, I thought this was it. The real thing, the acknowledgement I'd been waiting for. What are you sorry for? I asked. For what happened with Emma, for the situation. Okay. I understand now what you went through. With Mom. I understand how it feels. Do you? Yeah, I waited. I was wrong, he said quietly. About some things. What things? The way I talked about you in court. The way I described. He stopped. I was scared and I wanted to help Mom, and I said things that weren't completely fair. Not completely fair, I repeated. I said things that weren't true, he said, and I could hear how much that cost him. About the kind of father you were, about the kind of home we had. I exaggerated. I made it sound worse than it was because Mom needed the order to go through and I wanted to help her. Thank you, I said. That means something to me. So, can you help me? With the rent, the lawyer? I can help you, I said. But not because you apologized. The apology was for its own sake, and I appreciate it for its own sake. What I can do for you going forward is be your father. That means I'll help you when I can, and I'll tell you the truth when you need to hear it, and I won't pretend the last 2 years didn't happen. Okay, he said. He sounded like he was about 16. Okay, Dad. Get yourself a decent divorce lawyer. I'll cover it. And get back in school if you can. Loans, work study, whatever it takes. I'll match whatever you can put together yourself. But you're doing the work. I'm not just writing checks. I understand. And Garrett, what happened with Emma? I'm not going to lecture you about it. You know what you did. You know how it felt when you found out about your mother. You live with that. He was quiet for a long time. Yeah, he said, I know. We talked for another 20 minutes, awkward, careful. The way you talk when you're rebuilding something that's been damaged and you're not sure yet how much of the original structure is still sound. But it was real. It was more real than anything we'd said to each other in 2 years. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while. The house was quiet. Outside the window, the trees in the backyard were starting to turn. It was early October, almost exactly 2 years since I'd come home with those lilies and found my life rearranged. I thought about Emma Pruitt, who I'd met once at a family dinner before everything fell apart, and who had seemed sharp and warm and genuinely good. I thought about what she must have felt when that Facebook message came in from Diane's husband. I thought about the wedding ring hitting the parking lot asphalt. A few days later, she reached out to me directly. A short message through Facebook, polite and a little formal. Mr. Kowalski, I know this is strange, but I wanted to reach out. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening during your divorce. I believed what I was told, and I didn't ask enough questions. Going through my own situation has made me understand what you went through a lot better. I'm sorry for my part in it. I wrote back and thanked her. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She'd been a 20-year-old kid who'd trusted the people around her, which is what 20-year-old kids are supposed to do. I told her I hoped she landed somewhere good. She wrote back once more. She said she was doing okay, that she was back with her parents, that she'd reconnected with some friends she'd lost touch with during the marriage. She mentioned, almost in passing, that a friend had recommended singletune.com to her, said the values assessment had helped her figure out what she actually wanted before she started thinking about meeting anyone new. I'm not ready for any of that yet, she wrote, but I did the assessment and it was actually really useful just for me, just for figuring out what I believe and what I'm not willing to compromise on anymore. I read that and thought about Walt eating lunch in the truck, talking about meeting someone who'd been through betrayal and who knew what honesty really meant. I thought about Carol saying it was built for people who'd been through real things. I thought about the 45 minutes I'd spent answering questions I'd never asked myself before. I wrote back to Emma, good. Know what you want before you go looking for it. That's the right order of operations. She sent back a single thumbs up emoji, which made me laugh. As for Connie, she called me once, about a month after Garrett and I had talked. She was still living in a weekly motel. The real estate job wasn't covering her expenses. Her sister Patrice's husband had finally lost patience and asked her to leave. She wanted to know if I'd consider lending her money for a first month and deposit on an apartment. Why would I do that? I said. Because of Garrett. Because he needs stability while he's going through all this. Garrett is 20 years old. He'll figure it out. Ray, Connie, I'm going to say this once, clearly, so there's no confusion. I don't owe you anything. Not money, not housing, not sympathy. You made a choice. You made it every single day for 8 months. You spent $14,000 of our money on another man. You lied to a judge about me. You coached our son into lying about me. I paused. That's a lot of choices. I know I made mistakes, she said. Her voice was tight. I know that. But does that mean you get to just wash your hands of us after 18 years? I'm not washing my hands of anyone. I'm just not paying for your mistakes anymore. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. There's a difference. She tried one more angle. If you helped me now, it would show that you've forgiven me, that you're the bigger person. I almost laughed. Almost. Forgiving you doesn't mean financing your life, I said. I wish you well, Connie. I genuinely do, but I'm done. I hung up. She called twice more over the next month. I let it go to voicemail both times. The messages were variations on the same theme. She was struggling, she needed help. She hoped I could find it in my heart. I listened to them and didn't call back. Garrett called a few more times too in that period. Not asking for money, just talking. Awkward at first, then easier. He told me he'd applied to transfer to a school closer to home, that he was working at a restaurant 4 nights a week, that he'd started seeing a therapist to work through some things. I told him that was good. I meant it. The last time he called, he said something I've thought about a lot since. I think I understood what happened with you and Mom wrong for a long time, he said. I thought the story was that you were the problem and she was the victim. And then I watched her spend borrowed money on a wedding to make it look like everything was fine, and I watched myself do exactly what she did to you, and I thought, maybe the story was just that people make bad choices and then they need someone to blame. That's pretty much it, I said. I'm sorry I made you the someone. I know, I said. I know you are. I'm writing this from my kitchen, which is in my grandmother's house, which is mine. Outside, it's a Tuesday morning in October, and the light through the window is that particular fall light that makes everything look like it means something. I've got a job site to get to in an hour, a good crew waiting, work that I'm proud of. I'm 53 years old. I've been betrayed by my wife and lied about by my son and arrested at my own place of business and locked out of my own home. I've spent more money on lawyers than I ever thought I'd spend in my life. I've eaten gas station sandwiches alone in hotel rooms and wondered what I did wrong. And I've come out the other side of it with my house, my business, my integrity, and a relationship with my son that is damaged but alive, and getting better slowly, the way things do when you're willing to do the work. I don't know what the next chapter looks like. I've got some ideas, I've had a few conversations that feel promising. I know what I want now in a way I didn't before all this happened, and I know what I'm not willing to accept. And I know the difference between someone who's been through real things and someone who's just performing the idea of it. That's not nothing. After everything, that's actually quite a lot.